The member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Human Services, Financial Services, Superannuation and Corporate Law. How is Australia's economic management being received in the global community, and what stands in the way of coordinated global action to boost economic growth and support jobs?
The Minister for Financial Services, Superannuation and Corporate Law.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Wills for his question. And, Mr. Speaker, we have seen overnight more evidence of the response of international economic organisations to Australia's economic management over the last 18 months. The OECD has given further evidence that the stimulus measures put in place by the Rudd government have worked to cushion the impacts of the global recession. Mr. Speaker, the OECD also points out that rising unemployment will continue to be a serious problem in economies, including Australia. Now, Mr. Speaker, to keep the unemployment rate steady, we need to create around 20,000 jobs a month, which is a serious challenge in this international environment. Mr. Speaker, this is a challenge that requires stimulus to remain in place, a fact established and supported internationally. Over the last fortnight, we've seen Dominique Strauss-Kahn, we've seen senior officials from the White House, the G20, endorse the need to keep stimulus in place. And, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last 48 hours, we've seen the Prime Minister of Great Britain endorse the need to keep stimulus in place. He said in his speech to the Trade Union Congress in the United Kingdom, and I quote, that he stresses the need to implement fiscal stimulus packages in full without stopping them prematurely, end quote, Mr. Speaker. And the British Prime Minister also laid out the need to keep stimulus in place by saying the following: and we still have big choices to make. The choice of whether we continue action to support families and businesses, or whether we listen to the Tories and withdraw support from families, businesses, cut public services now and refuse to invest in Britain's future, Mr. Speaker. Now, anyone, Mr. Speaker, anyone who would characterise this speech as anything than a call to keep stimulus in place is engaging in false and misleading conduct, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm asked about what impediments there are to coordinated action on fiscal stimulus. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the things in place is those opposite who make things up, Mr. Speaker, make things up in their argument against coordinated fiscal stimulus. This has been a shocker of a fortnight for the economic credibility of the Leader of the Opposition and his colleagues, Mr. Speaker, a shocker of a fortnight. Last week we had the Robert Doctrine, which was to say that Australia is the only nation in the world not withdrawing stimulus. Simply untrue. And that was followed by the hockey hypothesis, which was to say, well, maybe that's not right, but it's all a left-wing conspiracy, Mr. Speaker. And then we had the Shadow Treasurer say that keeping interest rates lower was more important than supporting jobs, and today we've seen the Leader of the Opposition distance himself from his own Shadow Treasurer on that particular item. But now the G20 conspiracy has been replaced by the phantom Gordon Brown speech from the Shadow Treasurer, Mr. Speaker. Not content with dreaming up conspiracies, the Shadow Treasurer is now drafting phantom speeches. Next, Mr. Speaker.
The Minister will resume his seat. The member for North Sydney on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I raised this in a claim to have been misrepresented. And the experience of previous speakers, where the Prime Minister actually misled the House about what I said, which I pointed out.
The member for North Sydney resume his seat. There is no point of order. The member for North Sydney. Order. Deputy Prime Minister is not assisting. Yet again a member is giving a version of what they believe to be the precedents in this regard. And whilst that precedence perhaps is what should have applied in the past, it is not. I can remember many members having to come in here on several occasions to make claims to have been misrepresented on the same thing, and until this is addressed by the House, Until this is addressed by the House, that will continue to be the case, as regretful as it is. The Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Next we'll have the Shadow Treasurer quoting a speech from Al Gore saying that climate change isn't real, Mr Speaker. Or we might have him quoting that famous speech from Mahatma Gandhi saying that peaceful protest isn't all it's cracked up to be, Mr Speaker. Or, given the OECD's endorsement of this government's policies, I'm surprised he hasn't come out and alleged that OECD stands for the Organisation of Eccentric Communist Dictators, Mr Speaker. That's what you'd expect from the Shadow Treasurer. The Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Treasurer have been wandering around like Don Quixote and Sancho Panza trying to find evidence to support their fantasies that stimulus isn't working and should be withdrawn, Mr Speaker. But in the political discourse in Australia, you just can't make things up, Mr Speaker. You've got to have some evidence. Now, the Shadow Treasurer, as he says, stood yesterday twice in the House to take a personal explanation. Well, he should come back in the House today and take another one and explain why he hasn't yet come clean about misleading the Australian people and misleading the House about the Prime Minister of Britain. His attempt to mitigate this deception is based around where the quotation marks were placed in his remarks, Mr Speaker. That's his defence, the old quotation marks defence. What he ignores, Mr Speaker, is the fact that the very fibre of the Prime Minister of Great Britain's speech was to defend economic stimulus. Mr Speaker, at least when the former Shadow Treasurer plagiarised the speech, she got the quotes right, Mr Speaker. This one can't even get that. Now, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer should come back into the chamber this afternoon after question time and take another personal explanation. And he should explain, was he being dishonest or just plain sloppy?